This is Deborah McDermott with Introduction to Religion REL 2300. This video is going to discuss the Dialogue Decalogue. If you are in the online course offered through Hillsborough Community College, the Dialogue Decalogue, the full version, is available to you from the Section 1 information page. Additionally, prior to watching this video, you should have completed the Dialogue Decalogue reflection from Section 1. In the reflection, you have been asked to choose two of the rules. For each rule, you are supposed to state why the rule is easy to follow, or what could be done to make the rule easy to follow. And number two, what would make the rule difficult to follow, and why is the rule difficult to follow. Ideally, you have completed this reflection prior to watching the video. However, if you have not completed the reflection prior to the video, please make sure that when you are writing your reflection, you put everything in your own words, even to the point of applying the principles to yourself and saying why you personally might find the rule easy, difficult, how to make it easy, or how to make it difficult. So the Dialogue Decalogue is written by Leonard Swidler, and he actually wrote it in 1983 and revised it in 1984. The version that you see on the Section 1 information page is the version that lists them as 10 commandments and first appeared in the Journal of Ecumenical Studies. The version that we are using in this video is from the website dialogueinstitute.org and is specifically the dialogue principles. Dialogue in the interreligious, interideological sense is a conversation on a common subject between people with differing views, undertaken so that they can learn from one another and grow. These principles, originally called the Dialogue Decalogue, formulated by Professor Leonard Swidler, set forth some fundamental rules for dialogue. Today, in the modern world, businesses have begun to emphasize concepts such as diversity training and inclusivity discussion. The ideas presented in the diversity training or inclusivity really come back to the same principles that were proposed by Leonard Swidler back in the early 1980s. As such, by going through these 10 principles, it will be easier for you to have conversations with people of differing ideas. Over the last few years, I am sure you have noted that people who have different political persuasions or even different religions, different tastes of music, at times tend to be in conflict with each other and have difficulty having a positive conversation. Hopefully, as we go through these 10 rules, you will begin to get some concepts that will help you have better dialogue. Additionally, this dialogue, well, as it says, dialogue is necessary for truth, and that is Leonard Swidler there. This dialogue, though, isn't just the verbal dialogue. For our course, we're also talking about how these rules are important to follow just in learning, just in exploring different religious ideologies. So the first principle, the essential purpose of dialogue is to learn, which entails change. At the very least, to learn that one's dialogue partner views the world differently is to effect a change in oneself. Reciprocally, change happens for one's partner as she or he learns about her and himself. Now, often when we do this activity in class, the emphasis is the idea, well, this makes common sense. Of course we are in a conversation to learn. That seems very simple. However, think for a moment of the example of a parent who just had to go pick up their child because of a discipline issue, and they're driving home. Is the parent actually going to initially try to learn their partner, their child's idea of what happened? Or is it likely that the parent initially is not there to learn, but is there to preach or to teach or to argue? You see, while this first principle seems like common sense, the fact is, at times it's more difficult than we think. If you're going to learn about religion, if you want to learn about what other people think and feel, you actually have to be there to learn, not just to preach, not just to expand upon your own personal ideas, but also to learn. Finally, with this specific rule, you have the concept that in learning, you have to be open to change, realizing that your opinions might get altered. Now, as we go through each of these rules, we will find that every single principle builds upon the previous principle. So the second principle, dialogue must be a two-sided project, both between religious ideological groups and within religious ideological groups, inter and intra. Intra-religious and ideological dialogue is vital for moving one's community toward an increasingly perceptive insight into reality. Again, if we go to the conversation of a parent and a child, both parties have to be willing to listen to each other. When we're looking at people who have different views, different ideologies, you have to be willing to learn from the other. You have to be willing to share. If a conversation is only one-sided, then only one party is really there to learn. Both groups must speak. You must speak to people within your religious ideology because, as we discussed in the Intro to Religion videos, religion changes. Each person has their own experience, has their own interpretation of beliefs, and their own interpretation of practices. So it is always necessary to make sure that you have two-way dialogue, both with people who you agree with religiously, ideologically, as well as with those who you might know ahead of time there will be disagreements. The third principle, it is imperative that each participant comes to dialogue with complete honesty and sincerity. This means not only describing the major and minor thrusts, as well as potential shifts of one tradition, but also possible difficulties that she or he has within it. Again, this is one that initially we might say, well, it should be easy for us to be honest about who we are, about our beliefs. The thing is, oftentimes we're not completely positive about our beliefs, about our practices, and oftentimes we get confused or we have questions that we might not initially want to admit. So we always have to be willing to not just describe, but explain our own difficulties. Now, this concept of honesty and sincerity also comes up in knowing that we can't be afraid. A religious leader I know well recently was talking about the idea that you have to have a strong voice. You have to be willing to be who you are. Perhaps you've had the experience that some of my students, that some people I know have had, where, well, let's say there's a movie and you love the movie. Oh my gosh, that movie was amazing. Just, you loved it. You loved the acting. You loved the music, everything. You loved the CGI animation. Well, let's say you've watched the movie and you're going to meet up with some friends. As you get close to your friends, you overhear their conversation. And they happen to be talking about how horrible the movie was. They didn't think it was worth the money that was spent making it, and the CGI could have been better, and the acting was horrible, and the music didn't make sense. Essentially, they did not like the movie at all. Is it easy or difficult for you to be completely honest and sincere in how you felt and that you love the movie? Some will say yes, that it is easy for them to do that, but most will say, well, I tone it down a little. I pose it as, well, the music wasn't that bad. This part I liked, in order to try and feel like you can be accepted for your opinions. Fourth principle, one must compare only his or her ideas with their partner's ideas, and his or her practice with the partner's practice, not one's ideas with one's practice. Now, I am sure many of you have heard the phrase, do as I say and not as I do. In the course objectives for this class, it mentions that we will discuss the differences between belief and behavior. And the fact is, there are huge differences. Generally speaking, we do not live up to our ideals. We do not live up to the beliefs that we have. We fall short, or we miss the mark, as it is sometimes referred to in Judaism. Yet, when we look to have a conversation, we have to be willing to say, hey, I'm going to match my practice with your practice, and we'll compare and we'll contrast those differences. And then we can compare and contrast the ideas or the beliefs. In doing that, we're going to build better dialogue. Fifth principle, each participant needs to describe him or herself. For example, only a Muslim can describe what it really means to be an authentic member of the Muslim community. At the same time, when one's partner in dialogue attempts to describe back to them what they have understood of the partner's self-description, then such a description must be recognizable to the described party. Well, similar to the previous rule about honesty, sometimes it's difficult to know who you are, and yet you have to be able to know who you are for this fifth principle. Only you can describe yourself. Anyone else is not going to be able to describe exactly who you are, all your experiences. However, in your description, in defining who you are, the other person should be able to see that description in you. To that degree, we might say, well, if you say that you are Amish, then it might be expected by the person you are having the conversation with that you would be dressed a certain way, that you would act a certain way. Now, we'll go on to the next principle to finish that example, though. The sixth principle, participants must not come to dialogue with any preconceptions as to where the points of disagreement lie. A process of agreeing with one's partner as much as possible without violating the integrity of one's own tradition will reveal where the real boundaries between traditions lie, the point where he, she cannot agree without going against the principles of one's own tradition. So, in trying to define themselves, the person might say they are Amish, but when the dialogue partner sees that, well, this person is wearing cut-off shorts and a tank top, they might not see in the person that concept of being Amish. However, if they speak to the person and the person is able to describe how they are on their Rumspringer, on the time away from the Amish community, then both dialogue partners have a better understanding of the definitions and also are better able to talk about how there might be, well, assumptions. Think of, well, we mentioned this in the intro video a little bit with the media. If you happen to live in a community, and let's say the only thing that ever showed up on TV was information about Christianity where it discussed the gentleman who predicted the end of the world in 2012, the Westboro Baptist Church's protesting of the military or military funerals, and a gentleman that was up in the Gainesville, Florida, Newberry, Florida region who was trying to burn holy books of the Muslim religion of Islam. If that is all we ever saw on TV about Christianity, you would end up having a number of preconceptions as to what it meant to be Christian. And so when a Christian moved in next door, there are probably going to be a massive number of assumptions and ways that you begin to treat people. The fact is we have to move beyond these assumptions and move beyond preconceptions as to where points of disagreement lie, or else we will not be able to find a way to see the other person equally, which will come to the seventh principle here in a moment. We need to be able to not make assumptions as to what the other person is or isn't. Combining principles 5 and 6, there's this concept. I imagine every single one of you watching this video has in some way at some point in time been thrown into a category, into a stereotype based on perhaps age, race, gender, religion, political ideology, eye color, hair color, age, what type of sneakers or jeans you are wearing. And I am sure that some of the times that you have been lumped into these categories, such as what type of music you listen to, that the way another person interprets that category does not actually fit you. So just because one is blonde doesn't mean ... Or just because somebody is older or younger doesn't mean ... So we have to overcome these points of a disagreement, because the next principle, well, we can't get to it unless we have overcome those points. So rule number 7, dialogue can take place only between equals, which means that partners learn from each other, par cum pari, according to the Second Vatican Council, and do not merely seek to teach one another. Now, this sounds very similar to the second rule, that second principle, but in this principle, the emphasis is on this idea of being equals. Oftentimes, when we go into a conversation, we think, I am right, you are wrong. And rather than having a dialogue, we're having a debate. We must see the person we are having a dialogue with as just another person trying to get answers to questions of ultimate concern, trying to figure out how to understand the experiences that they have lived. Now, while we may not be able to be 100% equal, we each have our own experiences, we have to be able to treat the other person as an equal. This is true whether or not we are both lay people within a denomination, or even the idea that a religious leader must be able to acknowledge that they can learn from one of the members of the religion. That in some way, all of us have the ability to see each other in some form as equal. The 8th principle, dialogue can only take place on the basis of mutual trust, because it is persons, not entire communities, that enter into dialogue. It is essential for personal trust to be established. To encourage this, it is important that less controversial matters are discussed before dealing with more controversial ones. At the end of this course, there's a video called In God's Name. It was by the Naudet brothers. And in the video, towards the end, there is a rabbi from Israel who talks of a conversation he had with an imam. And he mentions that the imam told him, if they sit down to have coffee or tea, and they talk about matters of the family, the wife, the kids, and then matters of the community, of society, and the world, after such a conversation, while they might not love each other, it would be nearly impossible to hate one another. Trust can be something that we think of as being very difficult. We're not sure of the other person. We're coming into the conversation with preconceptions, assumptions, or we're not there to learn. When we have followed principles 1 through 7, we realize that we can start off with simple concepts, simple comparisons, simple events and experiences that we all go through in order to build trust. Rule 9. Participants in dialogue should have a healthy level of criticism toward their own traditions and towards themselves. A lack of such criticism implies that one's tradition has all the answers, thus making dialogue not only unnecessary but unfeasible. The primary purpose of dialogue is to learn, which is impossible if one's tradition is seen as having all the answers. We all like to be correct. We like to feel that we know the truth, capital T. We have to be willing to say, wait, no, I don't know everything. My parents might know more than I do. My religious leader probably knows more than I do. Somebody who has studied the tradition for decades knows more than I do. If we can acknowledge that we do not know everything, and we have followed that initial principle of being there to learn, that means we have to be willing to say, well, yes, I'm learning this. In fact, I'm changing and growing in my own perception of my own religion. We can learn that there are faults in our religion without losing our religion. We can learn that there are amazing gifts, talents, or concepts in another religion without losing our religion, and even growing it as we learn about another. Always be willing to acknowledge there is room for growth. Be willing to have that healthy level of criticism. Now, the 10th principle is by far my favorite principle. To understand another religion or ideology, one must try to experience it from within, which requires a passing over, even if only momentarily, into another's religious or ideological experience. As I mentioned when talking about phenomenology in the Intro to Religion video, the ability to try, to attempt, to experience what a follower of another ideology feels and thinks and sees is truly a gift and a wonderful experience. It is necessary if we are going to really learn, if we are going to have a sense of respect, to have a sense of understanding. And really, it is necessary for us to have empathy in that other ideology or religion. A quick little story. My very first year in college, I was going to be going into a field known as parapsychology at the time, and I was trying to get a degree, and I was taking a degree in psychology, and one of the courses I took was philosophy. Now, I had been interested in philosophy for many years. I had read many books, and throughout the class on the tests, I performed rather well. But on the essays and the class presentation, I was not doing so well. It was the first time in my life I made a grade lower than a B. And because of it, I was going to be at risk of losing one of my scholarships. So I retook the course the following semester with the same instructor. And I asked the instructor, how do I pass your class? What can I do to succeed? Her response was very confusing to me. She said, be the philosopher. I was 18 years old. How do I be a philosopher? The concept somehow at that point did not make sense to me. So I went through, and of course I did better on the test because having already taken them, it was easy to score higher. My first essay came back and my grade was a lot higher because I didn't have any of the grammar issues. My citations were correct, but it still wasn't quite an A. So I went to the professor and asked her what the problem was. She said that I wasn't being a philosopher. There was that phrase again. I asked her to explain to me what she meant. She said if you're really going to learn about philosophy or history or religion or any similar field, you have to be willing to cross over in your imagination into the experience of the person, the time, or the place that you're studying. As such, in the case of philosophy, I had to become these pre-Socratics that we were studying. Well, that made sense to me to a degree, but I asked her, how do I do that? And so we went about going through essentially what the essay was on. Why water was this ultimate source of all. And she said, close your eyes, imagine that you are living in a time period with no knowledge of science and, no internet, any of these things. Why would water be considered the ultimate source? And so we talked about how it comes down from the sky and up from the springs, the power it has to both kill and give life, the forms that it takes from a frozen solid ice to soft snow, to running water, to steam. By the end of it, I understood what she meant. This 10th principle was what she was talking about. You have to be willing to try and experience the other ideology. You have to be willing to say, okay, why would this person feel the way they do? What are the experiences that they have had? How do they see the world? And be willing to experience it. Now, doing that, one might find themselves fearful that they, again, might lose their religion. They might forget why their religion is so important, or perhaps they'll question whether they should convert after such an experience. Well, that experience can create those changes. It doesn't have to, and most of the time it won't. Take two college students who live together for the first time in dorms. We'll say one of them loves country music and one of them loves reggae music. And so there they are coming in. Both of them have assumptions and preconceptions about who the other person is. Oh, that person likes country music. That means ... Oh, that person listens to reggae. That must mean ... So after a couple weeks, they realized that they actually have the same major. They share a class together, and they both are annoyed by the same instructor, and both of them enjoy going to lunch and some of the same foods. So a semester break is approaching, and there happens to be two concerts, a reggae concert out on the beach and a small country music event going on that will include line dancing at one of the country music halls. The two roommates who have become friends decide to go to one another's events. Now think for a minute. Just because one of them goes to the other, reggae to country or country to reggae, does that mean that they will automatically fall in love with the roommate's music? No. Does it mean they might find and begin to have a better understanding of why the roommate likes the music? Probably. Most likely. Will they learn something that they might be able to bring back into their own tradition? Perhaps. The fact is, to learn and experience what the other one goes through is to learn to have empathy and understanding. So these 10 principles represent the Dialogue Decalogue. Please make sure you have done the Dialogue Decalogue assignment. And that wraps up this video. Thank you.